All right. Hello, everyone. Welcome to a discussion of the Edan Trilogy by Philip Chase. And I am joined here today by three wonderful guests, readers who have been so kind to not only read the books, but also engage with me, write reviews, and just be wonderful, nice, kind people. So I'm very excited to talk to these three. Beginning with Sean here is right next to me. And Sean, hello, and thank you so much for being here.
Thanks for having me, man.
All right. And Sean and I are buddies on Twitter. And Sean, you're thinking, or you're maybe going to have a YouTube channel. What are your plans for that?
Yeah, I'm thinking about it. I'm working on getting comfortable editing at the moment,
Yeah.
doing some the first video I put out, I'm not very proud of, so I'm sort of just like sweeping that under the rug and doing
Okay.
some research. And at some point next year, I'll probably get one going. But
Cool.
for,
Cool.
for now, I'll for the most part be behind the scenes, just
Yeah.
commenting and
Yeah, well, you are active on YouTube and Twitter and
yep.
elsewhere in our fantasy community, and we're very happy to have you. So,
Well, thank you for having me.
yeah. And below Sean there is Claudia. Hello, Claudia, all the way from Romania. Great to see you.
Great to see you again.
Yeah. And Claudia has been a guest on Dear Dr. Fantasy. We are Malazan buddies. We had a really cool discussion when Claudia was my guest for DDF. And she, of course, has this super cool channel, if you're into Malazan, where she interviews Stephen Erickson. And they have these long, cool discussions that are spoiler filled. So the fair warning, if you do check out Claudia's videos, you probably will want to have read the entire Malazan Book of the Fallen, I think. Also, maybe even helpful to have read some of the Esselmont books too, but I don't think quite as necessary. So yeah. But yeah, so good to have you here, Claudia.
Nice to be here. Sorry.
Good, good. All right. And finally, we have Quinn, who is a reviewer for Silverstones, which I think is just so cool. And just another great member of the fantasy community. I love your reviews, Quinn. I think it's so cool that you reviewed my books, and I'm so glad you're here.
Thanks, Philip. Glad to be here.
Awesome, awesome. And you'll probably notice that Quinn has a lag where his audio comes first, and then you'll see his lips move. But we will simply work around that. That's not a big deal. And a lot of people are going to be listening to this anyway, rather than watching. So yeah, it'll be fun. But yeah, so let's get started. And we will start with non-spoiler observations or questions about the trilogy as a whole, or about writing, or whatever you three want to get into. So I'll just go in the order that I introduced you, but anytime you feel like jumping in, feel free. And Sean, let's begin with you, non-spoiler.
All right. So my first question is, have any of your students read your books that you are aware of?
Oh, yes. Yes. The answer is yes. Actually, over the years, I have had a few students who read the books, primarily the first book, as drafts, and I got feedback from them. But yes, I have had students, some who were in my fantasy novels course, some who were not, who have picked up the books. Yeah, I have a few. Yeah.
Reaction, like,
Yeah, well, of course, they're my students, so they're not going to
uh,
be. Yeah, yeah. I don't. I mean, they've been very kind with their reactions. I'll put it that way, and I think that the fantasy fans particularly have enjoyed the books. So yeah, yeah, I would say so. A lot of them are, of course, younger, so they would not be as familiar with classical fantasy. And some people think my books are a kind of a blend of classic and modern. It seems to be a kind of consensus, at least.
yeah, I
Uh,
I would say so.
yeah. So, but yeah, it's fun when a student picks up the books. And now that they're actually published, I have a few students, a handful, who are fantasy readers who are starting to read them as published books. And that's really cool. I really enjoy that.
Awesome.
Yeah. So Claudia, non-spoiler question or observation, whatever you like.
I'll try a two-in-one.
Okay.
Well, I know that you've been writing these books for what, 18 years, I think?
Yeah, I started in 2004. Yep.
So I was curious, how real do the characters feel to you and how emotionally attached you are to them? And at the same time, will you continue to write, or is this just the only books that you intend to put out? And if you continue to write, will it be in the same universe, or will it be something else?
Okay, yeah. So I can answer the latter very easily. I have a standalone sequel all written, and it's called Wild Darkness Gathers. And it's about 15 years after the trilogy. And some of the characters, those who are still alive at the end of the trilogy, will be appearing, and we'll be revisiting some of the places. But I'm very excited for that. It is in a draft stage at the moment. It's a complete draft. I have to rework the draft, and then I'm hoping to show it to my developmental editor, Mr. A.P. Canavan, Dr. A.P. Canavan, I should say, otherwise known as a Critical Dragon. And then once he does that, I'll look at it again, and I am hoping maybe to have it late summer of 2024 out. So yeah, in terms of the characters and how real they feel to me, they feel like people in my life at this point. They live in here, and and I spent a lot of time with them, so I feel like I know them pretty well, and they tell me sometimes what to do. When I was writing the books, I felt like they were telling me where their stories were going. So it's that kind of a relationship, where we talk to each other, and sometimes I listen. So but yeah.
I knew about the standalones, so I meant beyond that.
Oh, of course. Okay, yeah. So
specifically from the point of view of the fact that you've invested so much time and you've gotten so attached to this particular set of characters. Do you intend to write in a different universe, a whole new different story, or will you still be sticking to the same world?
Yeah, okay, so yeah, good question. And I think I will probably write a few more books in this world. That's my instinct. But we'll see. I haven't actually started anything beyond Wild Darkness Gathers. I have a couple ideas for maybe a prequel. I've toyed with the idea of writing one with Urd as a protagonist.
Yeah.
Yeah, we'll see. But yeah, I have ideas. I think I'll end up sticking in this world for at least a little longer. Yeah. Yep. So, well, Quinn, what would you like to ask or observe, non-spoiler?
Yeah, well, first I just wanted to say thank you for the books. The trilogy has moved me probably more than definitely any other book I've read this year, and for quite a long time. So I find them very meaningful, and so I want to just thank you first off. And for my question, I noticed that in most sort of multi-POV fantasy, you have your sort of core set of characters and you follow them over the series, and some might die, or we might add a new one as new books come into the series. But with this trilogy, we have a pretty big main set of characters, but then you also add in a lot of like one-off POVs, or ones that come in, like the soldier from Saldara or that captain from Golgar, that have a few of them, and then don't show up again. So I just wanted to ask you why was you decided to have a lot of extra sort of POVs, and if you ever found it difficult to make them sound distinct or different.
Oh, what a great question. No one has actually asked me that before. So I love it. Yeah, I enjoyed a lot of these minor POVs that somehow inserted themselves into the story. And sometimes it was just that I felt that I needed a different perspective. So if there was a battle scene or something involving a particular culture and I didn't have a main POV present, I still wanted to represent that perspective. And it was, a decision I made. You were talking about, this isn't really a spoiler, but Kivan is the Sildarai bowman who shows up in book 2. And I felt like I needed that perspective in order to give a sense of just how formidable the other side was, and to give this perspective of an ordinary person sometimes, because when we write fantasy, we often tend to lean on the more epic characters, the ones with magic, or the ones who come from a more royal status or something like that. So I wanted to have an everyday person's perspective sometimes. And so, yeah, it was just, it was often just somehow the character sprang into my mind, and I hadn't planned on that particular character, for example. I could have told that battle just from the perspective of the person on the other side of it, which would be Munzel in this case, right? Who I had established as a more, central, important character. But I felt like I needed both sides there. And also just, in a battle particularly, I feel more interesting to shift a lot. It's sort of an Abercrombie thing to do, I guess, is to shift perspectives.
I thought that
Yeah.
during that battle in particular, I was just like, this is very like the heroes jumping from like viewpoint to viewpoint to viewpoint. It was very well done.
Thanks. Yeah. I actually did write those before reading Abercrombie. I wrote books 1 and 2 before I read Abercrombie. And when I read Abercrombie, I was like, damn you, Abercrombie. Because he does the same thing and he does it so well. And but anyway, c'est la vie. But yeah, I really enjoy those little minor characters that slip in, and it's a chance to it's a challenge to create a character spur of the moment who really leaps off the page, who feels convincing, and it's fun too. So yeah, just giving a different perspective. Often it's just following my intuition. And I am more of a planner, but when I introduce those minor characters at certain moments, it's often a spur of the moment thing. And sometimes they tell me, hey, I'm not done with you yet. And they end up doing more in the story, as is the case with Kivan, for example. So we're moving on to spoilers for The Way of Edan now. And you guys, I'll just keep going and keep feeling free to jump in anytime. Sean, what would you like to ask about The Way of Edan?
Where did you come up with the idea for your elves?
Ooh, okay.
They are just unlike any elf I've ever read. I don't even know if I would call them an elf if you hadn't used that word.
Yeah.
I
Okay.
definitely wouldn't have used the word elf for that entity.
Yes. Okay, cool. So yeah, my elves are not your standard pretty people with pointy ears. That's for sure.
No, they are not.
They are fundamentally, I think, a couple things. One, very much they are rooted in my readings as a medievalist. So when elves are referred to in Old English poetry, for example, they are, yes, beautiful, but they are also monstrous. They are frightening. They are terrifying. In Beowulf, there's a list of really nasty, scary monsters, and elves are in that list. So they're not just beautiful, ethereal creatures in the most ancient traditions. They're frightening, and they should be. Even in the stories where they're so beautiful, the more, I guess, Celtic stories where you have the fairy and that sort of thing, they're dangerous. They're always dangerous. Their beauty is part of their danger. So that element of something that is both very alluring and very frightening simultaneously is something that came from my engagement with very old stories. So I feel like I'm going back to a more ancient tradition when I portray the elf that way. I also, in terms of the magic, which the elf is very much connected to in this world, I lean a lot on Buddhist philosophy. And so
Makes a lot of sense.
yeah. So the idea of the elf bringing out the perception that you are not, that your individuality is fundamentally a delusion, that you are part of the fabric of everything. That's very much a Buddhist thing. And so, yeah, those are the two biggest influences, I would say, in how I developed the elf. Yeah.
Yeah, like you mentioned, elves can be beautiful, but they are always terrifying. Like Galadriel.
Yes, there's a bit of that in Tolkien. There's
Yeah.
certainly a bit of that in Tolkien.
Like when Galadriel really wants that ring, she is, yeah. Like
yeah.
when I first saw Lord of the Rings, that scene scared the ever loving crap out of me.
Yeah.
Very creepy.
Yeah, it is it is there in Tolkien. I think it's Tolkien was, I feel, very not super happy with the way elves were described in Old English poetry, even though he was a great scholar of Old English and everything else. In his translation of Beowulf, interestingly, he leaves out elves from that list that I mentioned, when there's this catalog of monstrous creatures.
Yeah.
He translates, clearly it's the word elf, but he translated as goblin or something like that in his translation, because I think he felt that the poet got it wrong, that the poet didn't understand elves the way they ought to be understood, as fundamentally the beauty for Tolkien is primary, I think. But because of their ancientness and because of they're just formidable to other races, elves feel a bit frightening, even in Lord of the Rings. But I lean on that fear factor a lot more.
Oh, yes, you did.
Yep. So, Claudia, what would you like to ask or say about the Way of Edan? 3. Okay, let's go for it.
But 2 of them are non-spoilery. So one is, why did you choose to go with religious war as a theme for the books?
Religious war. Okay, yes, let's
Religious
tackle
war.
that first, or
Okay.
unless the others are related.
No, they're not related.
Okay, all right. So holy war. Why a holy war? This has to do a lot with my own personal life, growing up, the son of a pastor and grandson and great-grandson of a pastor, and at one point in my life when I was a teenager, thinking I probably would be a pastor as well. So I've had a lot of engagement with religion, especially in my younger years, and it's something that I still feel attached to in some ways, even though I don't practice any particular religion these days. But I still consider myself a spiritual person. But it has long fascinated me that we have these institutions that we call religions that have fostered so much good and love and compassion in the world, but simultaneously have at least been used as the excuse for a lot of violence, and have also, I think in some cases, you can't argue, have induced hatred and otherizing and so much destruction. So how is that possible? That is it's such a human thing, I suppose, when you think about it, that we are creatures who are so conflicted, and I don't know of any institution where you see that more clearly than in religion, where you have both compassion and hatred simultaneously springing from the same source. So that fascinates me, and I want to explore that. And so that's why a holy war is the backdrop to this. Yeah.
Okay, the second question. People can be kind in their reviews when it comes to reading books, but they can also be cutthroat.
Oh yeah.
Have you received any mean, seriously eviscerating mean comments? And if so, how do you deal with them on a personal level?
Oh yeah, I definitely have. And Quinn is smiling because he probably knows one I'm thinking of right now. But there's, yeah, I don't know if you saw that, but as soon as my book came out, someone created an account and gave me a 1-star review and didn't say anything about the book at all. Just seemed like they were someone who didn't like me very much. I have no idea who they are necessarily, or why they did that, or why they feel the way they do. But yeah, it's just part of doing anything public, I guess, is you do have a few disturbed people out there who are just wanting to spread misery, I guess. So there's that. And then there are people who genuinely don't connect with the story. And that's fine, and I have never felt that my books are going to connect with anyone and everyone who reads them. They're going to be people who bounce off of them and I don't get this, I don't like this. And that's fine. You just have to, I think, go into this sort of thing knowing that some people are going to love it, some are going to like it, some are not going to like it at all. And that's okay. Hopefully, and that's helpful in a way too, because people who don't like it are going to say, I didn't like this. And then people who maybe feel like they have similar tastes are not going to bother reading the books. But then there are the people who love it and say, I love this. And then hopefully people who feel like they have similar tastes are going to pick it up. And so the story ends up being in the hands of the right people. I hope that process works. So yeah, I've had a few real negative reviews for sure, and some of them genuinely just did not like the story, and I have to just say, oh well, yeah, that's okay, yeah, and move on. So yeah.
When I was referring more to the nasty, mean, evil comments rather than I didn't like the book, which is genuine.
Yeah. So that one example I gave, it was pretty nasty, I would say. And I had a couple. A lot of them never even leave a review, so I don't know why. They give me a 1 star or something. But a couple have written pretty nasty reviews that get personal. But again, that's just part of the deal. If you do something public, you're going to encounter people who usually they hide behind a fake account, or they have and they just seem like they want to be trolls or something. I don't know. I can't explain their motivations. But
the internet allows people to be so much nastier than they would ever have the gall to be in person.
Yes.
Most people would never say those things to somebody face to face, but because there's that disconnect, they just feel like they can say whatever they want, which it's a dangerous precedent to set, I think.
But it's unfortunate. Yeah, you would like to think that people would be better than that, but
that's precisely what I meant, because when you create something, no matter what it is that you create, you put a lot of yourself in it, and you become vulnerable in sharing it with the public.
That's true.
And anybody who is a creator out there who gets this sort of comments must get wounded. It's a human reaction. So my question was more along the lines of, how do you deal with it on a personal level? How do you get over it? How do you heal from this sort of attacks? Because they are personal attacks, or at least they are felt as personal attacks, even the intention isn't there.
I focus on the people who either give me constructive criticism, which is great, and the people who resonate with the books and enjoy the story. And so if I feel like I need to give myself a little boost, I'll go on Goodreads and read some of those kind folks who's given me 4 and 5 star reviews, and think, yeah, I'm so happy that my story connected with somebody like this. So that's really, people have no idea how helpful those reviews are actually for a writer. They're really, I bet you there are plenty of writers who would give up without the reviews that are so encouraging, and some of them can be constructively critical too. But that feedback is really important for an author. So that's why I'm very grateful to get that kind of feedback. But yeah, I focus on the positive. That's kind of how I am in most ways in my life. That's how I try to be anyway. And if somebody out there wants to say mean things, then I feel like that probably affects them more than it does me, because some version of me, not me really, but some version of me that they have conjured up is living rent-free in their heads, which is, I feel bad for them, because I'm not the person they think I am, obviously, but And it's a shame that somebody would actually put that much effort to create a fake account and, you know, to write a nasty review. You're putting that much effort into hating someone. It seems kind of like, wow, you must have some problems in your life, you know? I kind of feel bad for those people, but yeah.
To be honest, I'm surprised you received those sorts of comments, because you're probably the nicest person I've ever known. Maybe a little too kind. So it's surprising that there are people who would feel that way about you.
Yeah.
Really.
Yeah.
Phil, you're
This,
such a nice guy. I can't imagine like somebody hating you. So
that all kinds of folks. Maybe I remind them of a teacher they hated or something. Who knows? Who knows? But yeah. So, and you had a third one, Claudia?
yes, this one is actually related to the first book. I had a distinct feeling that the importance of Dayraven's name is something essential to the story.
Yeah.
And his mother chose it with a lot of intent and insisted that he should be named that way, and yet that didn't really resolve anywhere in the next few books. My guess is, and that's just a guess, that she might have had a glimpse into his future and that's why she chose the name. But I was wondering why you chose to never reveal that.
Well, I kind of did in the third book at the very end.
I was going to say at the very end, I think we sort of that.
Yeah. So we'll talk about that when we do the spoilers for book 3.
Then I
We'll
missed
save that
something.
one. Yeah. We'll save that one when we talk book 3. So don't let me forget. So.
Oh no, I won't.
All right, cool.
Just wanted an excuse to use the name from Beowulf.
That's true. That's true. That is true too. Yeah. It is a Beowulf name. So yeah. So what did you want to say about the Way of Edan, Quinn?
So I wanted to ask if there is any particular reason that some people have the gift and have it stronger than others. Like, why do some people have magic? Because one of the big themes is that we're all part of a larger whole, right? You already sort of mentioned individuality is some of an illusion. So is it that some people have a stronger connection to that larger whole, or they're more aware of a connection that everybody has, or what is it?
Yeah, great question. Great question. I think when we look at fantasy, most of the time, the traditional approach is that there are only a few special people who have access to magic, however the magic works. There are a few exceptions to that. Like Malazan is a series where just about anybody who wants to do magic can, but you have to be trained and you have to, but even there, I think there are different aptitudes where you have people who have a much stronger ability to do it naturally. Like, I guess any kind of talent, like some people are more natural athletes than others. Some people are more, are good at math. Right. And some of us struggle with math. So yeah, me too. An English professor for a reason.
Yeah.
So yeah, magic works like that in Malazan. I think of my world as being somewhat like that, in the sense that there's probably some amount of the gift in everybody, but in the vast majority of people, not enough to really make a difference, where they wouldn't be able to use the gift to manipulate the world around them. And then there are a few people who have enough of it to actually use the magic, and then a few, even fewer, who have enough to be considerably powerful with it. As to why some people are more powerful than others, it seems like it's something that runs in families to some degree, because Dayraven has it and Urd has it, and Dayraven's mother had an aptitude for it, although she was not trained. So yeah, I think it's that's about as far as I can go in terms of explaining how it works, in terms of how it's inherited or why it manifests in some people and not others. But in my head, probably everybody has a little tiny bit of it, at least. But most people aren't aware of it. And many people who even have it to a fairly strong degree aren't aware that they have it, because it never You know, nothing ever happens in their lives where it occurs that even Dayraven gets to be the age he is, just thinking, well, he has a special bond with animals. You know, he understands people a little more readily than most others. You know, Ord would have recognized that as a sign of the gift, but most people would just say, "Yeah, Dayraven's a nice guy." You know, so yeah.
Cool.
Yeah,
that was my headcanon. So
cool. Yeah. And with that, I think we are ready for the Prophet of Edan. So, Sean, what would you like to ask about book 2 or observe?
So I messaged you on Twitter about halfway through with
Yes, you did.
the prediction.
Yeah.
I don't know if I do. Can I talk about that here?
Yeah. Think? Well, we're doing full spoilers for book 2, so
okay. Yeah. So my prediction at the end of this book was that Dayraven is going to become a major problem for everyone, and he was going to have to be taken out. Not going to go into what actually happened, but yeah, you were laying the breadcrumbs for a long time, and once I caught that, I was like, oh no, oh no,
yeah,
this is not gonna end well.
Yeah.
When did you decide that was going to be the direction that you took? Did you know from the very beginning that, yeah?
I did. So it's actually a really cool question because it actually gets to the heart of the structure of the trilogy, where and a lot of people have commented on this, the idea that book 2 ends kind of like the end of a series would normally end. Like,
yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Like you feel like, okay, what now? And then at the very end, in the epilogue or so of book 2, I give you the what now. In a way, I give you that hint. I give you that the basis of or maybe even confirming the idea that Dayraven's fairly dangerous. I mean, this amount of power concentrated in a person is not natural. It's not the way it's supposed to be.
He's actively fighting and wrestling for control.
Yep. So what I tried to do with this trilogy is where I feel like I do something different. It starts out very traditionally. A lot of people will read The Way of Edan and think, oh, you know, this is very classic fantasy. No surprises here. I think you begin to see where the surprises come at the end of book 2, and then book 3 I feel is where I just go off on my own and
100%.
Yeah. And do something a bit different. So it's, you know, in classic terms of the hero's journey, you have just to break it down in its simplest, most basic terms, you have the departure, where the hero leaves his womb-like safe space, you know, the Shire or whatever, you know, and is forced out into the world. And it's challenging and it's scary and it's different. And the hero has to fail a few times and adjust to things. But then there's the second part, which is definitely the Prophet of Edan, where the hero transcends and triumphs and is transformed in the process of all of that. And most these days, a lot of stories just end there. And I feel like, but what about the third part, which is the return? You don't go through all that and then just everything goes back to normal, right? What about what's happened to the world?
What's the fallout?
What's the fallout exactly? And that's what I wanted to look at in Return to Edan, and that's where I feel like maybe I've distinguished this trilogy in a way. So from
I don't think that you've read the Red Rising series, but it sort of reminded me a little bit of that. Is the original trilogy is sort of your classic dystopia plot arc, where the end is, oh, we overthrew the evil rulers, sort of thing. But then the rest of the series, so books 4 through what will be 7, is, you know, 10 years later, what now? Now that we've overthrown a huge government, everything's not just happy, right? We have to fix a broken society, and there's going to be people that like the old order and all that sort of thing. So that was the first series that I saw do it, something like that. And then when I got to the end of this second book, I was like, oh, this is going to be a really cool third book, because I like that. You know, what happens after we win, you know?
Yeah, yeah, cool. I have not read Red Rising yet, but now you made me want to read it more. So
I can highly recommend it, if only for the first 3 books. I've read book 4, started book 5. It was a bit too dark for me at the time where I was mentally. Dark age. The book is dark.
wow. Okay.
So I was not in the right space for it, but highly recommended. Push through the first book. It's a bit of a struggle.
Okay.
But
Yeah, that's a
after
tricky thing too, because I feel like some people feel that my books get a little bit darker with each one. But I also hope that there's an abiding sense of wonder and beauty and hope in the trilogy. So I don't want them to feel entirely bleak or anything like that. But I hope that people come away with a sense of beauty and wonder. That was my
I
intention.
will say that you were much more vicious than I thought you would be. Being such a nice guy, and then some of those scenes, man, I was just like, you,
Yikes.
how could you?
I did feel bad a few times, but yeah. So cool. So Prophet of Edan, Claudia, what would you like to ask or say about that one?
Well, it took me by surprise. It really took me by surprise. It felt like the story is ending mid-book, and I was wondering where were you going to take it next. So that was a nice feeling. You know, being surprised is always nice. Unfortunately, I don't do very well with evaluating a book if it's in a series. I evaluate the entirety of the story. So I'm going to go with a different kind of question between Erkenwald and his despair and view of pain being unavoidable, especially by the end of the series.
Yeah.
And Raven's point of view on with regards to pain and how life is worth living despite the pain.
Yes.
I was wondering, what do you think about suicide and how does it sit with you? The concept. I mean, is pain something that motivates suicide, or is something that it shouldn't? And once you're done answering, I also have a minor request. Would you please chant one of your incantations for us?
Change what? One of the incantations.
Yes. Cast some mage fire for us.
Oh, cool. I mean, that is cool. They can make flames, you know, shoot out from an existing, you know,
but
like
you can chant.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah. Okay, I
So
like that
I'm mainly curious about how this language sounds, how you imagined it, how you would pronounce it.
How would I pronounce it?
Mostly a linguistic request.
So you want me to read one of the songs of origin? Oh, I can do that. Yeah, sure. I'll have to find one for you.
Either read, or if you don't read, you say that it's also sort of chanted, not just read. So
how would it be?
Sounds
Okay.
like.
Yeah.
It starts
We
low and
want
then
a
it
full-on
increases
voice
and it increases as you repeat. I was wondering how does that sound like, how you imagined it.
We're gonna have to get Alan in here.
Alan is the one that's gonna have to do it for the audiobooks. And I've heard him do it. He's pretty good, actually. But
I was gonna ask how that was coming along.
I will. Yeah, he's coming along. Okay, I know which one I'll do for you. All right, and but to answer your other question about suicide first, this is something I thought about. I will go as far as to say that I think under very special circumstances that I feel that euthanasia should be a thing, that people should be allowed to end their lives if they have a terminal illness, if it is very certain that is going to end their lives, and if they are in terrible pain and suffering. Under those circumstances, I think someone should be allowed to end the pain, and that also only after a considerable amount of counseling and discussion with an expert in the field of mental health and a doctor. So under those circumstances, I do personally support the idea of euthanasia. That's about it, though. In terms of a healthy individual who is dealing and I mean, in a way, I feel like, who am I to tell people, you have to suffer, you have to keep going through this. I would like to think that people in such a situation could be helped, that they could find help, that there would be someone in their lives who would also suffer terribly for their absence. And that's a consideration that should be there, that they could see a future. I would hope that they could be helped to see a future where their lives are important and matter, and that they would end up not wanting to take their lives. So that would be my hope. So I hope that doesn't sound judgmental or anything like that. I don't want to sound judgmental of people who are in a very difficult place and are, thinking those kinds of those. The last thing I want to sound like is judgmental. But I hope that there could be a way to get those people out of that place in every circumstance. But that's.
I was thinking about it mainly in the concept of cultural differences, because in Europe and the Americas and the Christian-oriented cultures, we see, or better said, the Abrahamic religions cultures, we see suicide as some kind of sin, and it comes attached to a guilt and a blame. While at least for the Japanese and generally the Asian side, this blame does not exist. So I was wondering how suicide is perceived from this point of view, which it's sort of reflected in the book as well.
Yeah, to a degree. Yeah, I think. There are a couple characters who put themselves in positions of where they're likely to die. We can put it that way. Beginning with Gnorn and Hawk, in the Way of Edan, their whole purpose in joining the Torland military is to die, but in a very specific way, in a way that is considered by their ancestral laws to be honorable. So they can't just go and take their lives in any old way. It has to be combat.
Pick a fight with a random person,
and you can't just go pick a fight on the street. Yeah, it has to be honorable combat. So that's a form of suicide. Ultimately, though, I think Gnorn, he loses his brother. Hlock dies. He succeeds, essentially.
He gains a brother, though. He gains a brother.
And that's right. Gnorn finds a reason to live. Now, would Hlock have found a reason to live? I'd like to think so, if he had survived the Battle of Yarfine at the end of the book 1. Gnorn certainly finds a reason to live. And I would like to think that is something that can happen for people even when they're in the darkest places.
It happened for me. Not to get too deep into it, but I've been in very dark places, and reading, specifically fantasy, is what got me out of it.
Yeah,
it gave me something to look forward to, and something. Yeah, like reading literally saved my life. So I'm forever grateful to authors that continue to write books that resonate.
Yeah, no, that's beautiful, Sean. It really is. And I think for all of us here, we wouldn't read if it didn't help us with our lives, that's for sure. I feel like reading and stories help me make sense of my own personal suffering and also the suffering I see all around me in the world. And help me to cope with it. So that's a beautiful question, Claudia. Now I'm going to read from the chapter in The Way of Edan, The Eternal Worship. It's chapter 14, where Bledla goes at it and he does all these spells, and he shows everybody his, you know, his power in the gift, and he's doing this whole ritual, and these people are chanting in the background. And Bledla begins with a song of origin, which obviously turns out to be related to fire, because all the flames leap up in the torches in the temple and outside, and everybody gasps and all that. So I'll just try my best to read this. And I don't have quite a Bledla voice, you know. I kind of hear him having a very deep and resonant voice.
Yeah, deep and booming is the way I pictured it.
Yeah, Alan's going to do a great job with Bledla. But yeah. So anyway, it's sort of the cadence that I have in my own mind, I guess. Agadatha ar hurolin Tyrion Nimrathai in Katha in Varubintanian Nangonai. Hurishwe ni Danundan Brinkala Targan. Nangale di Valanan Nunguisha Bardan. So there you have. Did you guys see any flames anywhere?
Yes.
Well, you can always add the extra effects when you added the video.
I'll add flames.
That's
when
not
I edit.
a bad idea.
Yeah. That's a good idea, Claudia. I'll do that. So.
Well, that was certainly a lot better than the way I read it. So that sounded good. That really sounded good.
To be honest, I had a hard time not just skipping the songs of origin.
I think most people do skip them. So.
Because it just doesn't, it looks like word soup to me.
Yeah.
I insisted in reading them, in finding a cadence, a rhythm, a certain pronunciation. I tried to see if I understand any of the words, probably equating them to Tolkien's, you know, you use Galad, or which is light in Tolkien. So I was wondering if it has anything to do with it, especially since it's, you know, mage fire or fire. Just tried to make sense of it, and I tried when you say that, you know, you chant 2, 3, 4 times. You don't write it on the page, but you explain that this is how it happens. You start on a piano, you go louder and louder as the charm takes place, the spell takes place.
Yeah.
And I really tried to read it in my mind and repeat it in my mind for the effect. But I was wondering how it's supposed to sound like, as opposed to the way I'm reading it. So that was kind of fun.
Yeah, cool. Thank you. Yeah, that was a fun one. So Quinn, what do you want to say about the Prophet of Edan, book 2?
Well, in this book, we see dragons.
Yes, dragons. Yeah,
lots of dragons.
That's awesome. And so I was wondering, you know, in fantasy, we get all sorts of different kinds of dragons. There are some that are, you know, more perhaps intelligent animals, but still animals, and that's about it. And then there are others where they are almost human-esque, and they can talk, sometimes only to their riders, and like telepathically, and things like that. So I was wondering, are the dragons that you go sort of your preferred sort of mental model of dragons? And if there's any sort of, with your background as a medievalist, if that influenced what the dragons in here, or what the inspirations for your specific type of dragon is.
Oh, you guys have the best questions. All right, so dragons, and my influences are definitely, well, some probably more than I can even consciously think of, but some of it goes back to the Old Norse and the Old English Beowulf. So in the Old Norse sagas, you do have Fafnir, who is a dragon that talks. Fafnir was a dragon slain by Sigurd in the Volsung saga. And there is a point in that story where Sigurd, the hero, has a dialogue with the dragon, which is very much what Tolkien based the dialogue between Bilbo and Smaug on, and is also very much what I'm basing my dialogue between Daeraven and Gorsarhad on. Now, Gorsarhad cannot talk. My dragons cannot talk the way people do with their mouths. What's going on there is Daeraven and Gorsarhad are having an exchange of thoughts. that is happening through the gift, that is happening through Dayraven's magic. He is hearing the thoughts of this beast that is every bit as complex. Now, just because dragons in My Dragons don't use speech the way humans do, doesn't mean that they don't have complex thoughts and that they don't communicate. So they would have different ways of doing that. And we're increasingly recognizing that a lot of our fellow creatures in this world have fairly sophisticated ways of communicating that aren't speech, and that some of them that are particularly close to us, for example, gorillas and chimpanzees and orangutans, can be taught sign language and use it in very sophisticated ways and convey emotion and all kinds of things. I think of the gorilla Coco.
I was trying to think of Coco,
who was had a rich life and had friendships, and even had a kitten at one point. They had given Coco a kitten, and the little kitty died. And Coco was visibly depressed and expressed in sign language, "I'm sad. I miss my cat." So dragons are complex, and they are perhaps in some ways more complex than we are. You look at, there are creatures on this planet in our world who live longer than we do and have bigger brains than whales, for example.
I was going to say whales.
Yeah. Dolphins appear to have actually more complex brains than we do. In terms of, I think both, I could be wrong on this, somebody can correct me, but I think in terms of both size and so a lot of it depends on how convoluted the brain is, right? How many folds there are, and that, because it's not just one uniform organism. There's a lot of folds in a brain.
Yeah.
Dolphins have very complex looking brains. So I feel like there are inner lives to these creatures, and particularly a dragon that lives thousands of years. Can you imagine how complex, how different that perspective must be from our own? And Dayraven gets to tap into that because he has enough of the gift to tap into this song of origin and use it. Most people cannot. It's a very rare thing. Bledla, of course, as well. But it's a very rare thing for someone with the gift to have enough power to actually wield that song of origin and hear a dragon's thoughts. So because of the complexity. That's another rule about this magic, is the more complex the creature, the more difficult it is to wield the song of origin. Or
coerce a dragon. That's even harder.
Exactly. Yep. So anyway, my dragons, I guess, are in that way, because they can't talk, they are more like the Beowulf dragon, which is, it's just this fire breathing, angry, jealous creature that doesn't like it when you steal its treasure, I would say that they are more beast-like in my series. But having said that, recognizing that other creatures have a lot of complex thoughts going on in there. And I don't do, it's not dragon rider fantasy, except that Dayraven does ride on.
I was gonna say there is a little bit of riding of dragons.
A little bit of that, yes, yeah. But we love dragons, and Tolkien said it best when he talked about dragons in his essay on fantasy, on fairy stories. He said, "I desired dragons," and I think all of us who read fantasy can relate to that. So
I'm honestly not the biggest dragon fan.
Oh, okay.
I like them well enough. I just don't get. There are so many other fantasy creatures out there that don't get as much attention. I think they're a staple for a reason, but I'm not as head over heels for dragons as most people are.
Yeah, well, dragons they do tend to be glory hogs, I think. Dragons do, yeah. So
they always steal the show.
Now we are full spoilers for the entire series. We're on return to Edan, so don't worry about spoiling anything. Take it away, Sean. What do you want to say about this book? How'd you like it?
Well, first off, thank you for making me put my Kindle down and just sob
Oh no.
at the end. Like, not the very end, but the scene where Raven gets sent off into the different directions. And
yeah,
man, that hit home. Like, that you landed that so perfectly. So
thank you. Yeah,
I
actually,
want,
I mean, it might sound stupid, but I cried too when I wrote it.
good. That man, it was beautiful. But Jorman, I'm not sure if I'm saying that correctly.
I'm fine either way. I tend to say Yoruman myself.
Okay.
Yeah.
I figured I was pronouncing most names wrong.
That's okay.
He was sort of in the background doing his own thing for a long time, and I think a lot of readers will forget about him until this book.
Yeah.
And be like, oh yeah, he's kind of conniving, he's kind of scary. And we were talking on Twitter, and you're like, yeah, he's complicated.
Yeah.
And I just have to say how taken aback I was by the elf dwellers.
Oh yeah.
I was just like, holy crap, this is like zombies. Like, that's what we're dealing with here. We're dealing with elf zombies. Like, did not see that coming. Like, had no. So the idea of you kill one of them, you become one of them. I'm just like, ooh, there's too many proud people in this world that will not let these enemies essentially just march through their lands. This is going to end terribly.
Yep. Yeah, that's a good call right there. Yeah. Yeah. No, in terms of Yoruman, you mentioned first, he is a complex character. There are aspects of him that I relate to. And there are questions he asks that I think a lot of us ask. Ultimately, I see him as a kind of like a Faustian character in that he goes too far. He wants to conquer death. Okay, fair enough being mad about death, being upset. But it seems like death is a thing that we're just going to have to deal with. It's part of life. It's part of the deal. In fact, it may even be necessary for life. It may even add beauty and poignancy to life. So to want to undo it is to want to undo life as we know it. And that might be a bad thing to do, but humans seem to have a track record of wanting to do things they ought not to. And through hubris. And so Yoruman, I feel like, captures a lot of that in his arc. And we see how he's got plans, he's got ambitions, even in the first book. And he had been working with Erkenwald all along with a plan to eventually get rid of Bledla, which happens prematurely at the end of book 2 when Erkenwald just does him in, and hopefully I surprised a few readers with that scene. But yeah, Yoruman, I feel like, is hopefully a character that he does some awful things, but at the same time, I hope that a lot of readers will find aspects of him relatable.
Yeah, so. Absolutely. And you mentioned Erkenwald, and God, what a sniveling worm he became at the end, and getting trampled. Like, I was like, that is just such a fitting end for such a despicable character.
Yeah. There's a part of me.
I did feel bad for him, though. That's the thing. Because David took all of it and made him feel everything that he had done. And he had done a lot of bad things to a lot of people, and having to deal with that 24/7, I don't know if I would wish that on my worst enemy. Like, that sounds really terrible.
I mean, yeah, in a way you could say it's one of Raven's failures.
Yeah.
He tries to make Erkenwald see what he's done. but he does so in a way that he just dumps all that into his mind, and he can't handle that.
Yeah, he essentially just breaks.
Yeah, yeah. You might read that as justice. I think Dayraven's thought was that he wanted to help, he wanted to heal, and he didn't have a lot of time to do it, so he couldn't be too gentle with Erkenwald there, knowing that this elf thing was going to eventually just explode out of him. So he wanted to make peace, and he was doing pretty well down there in Cargillion. Between the native Cargilese and the Torlander soldiers, there was something really beautiful growing, I think. If he had had more time, maybe he could have done it the way he wanted, but he didn't. And what he did to Erkenwald ends up being, yeah, I'm not sure how I feel. I think it is a failure, though, because it doesn't work the way he wanted. Erkenwald, in spite of being made to feel all of that pain and suffering, he still has this ego. He dies because he wants to be the hero. He wants to save the day. He wants to reclaim his kingship. And it utterly, I mean, he's very out of touch with reality at this point, and it utterly fails. But you can see his ego still working there. He's essentially, I see him as a narcissist.
Yeah, 100%.
Somebody who feels that the world exists to give them pleasure and entertain them and give them what they want. Developing empathy, maybe it could have been a thing. I don't know. Are there people who simply cannot feel empathy? Are they broken in some way? I don't know. But I feel that maybe if given time, Dayraven could have weaned Erkenwald away from his narcissism gradually and helped him to see, maybe not, maybe I'm wrong. Maybe there are just people who just are entirely selfish. I don't know. But yeah, so that is a way in which Dayraven's plan doesn't really work the way he wanted it to. Yeah. So yeah. Should anything else, Sean, or should we move on to Claudia?
No, we can move on. I was
Okay.
gonna talk about like the fact that at the very end when Dayraven just like splits off, that was just like the raven at the top of the like mountain encouraging them to keep going.
Yeah,
it was beautiful. It was really well done.
Thank you. Yeah, well, you remind me, we can answer Claudia's other question there from earlier. We might as well do that, where it does. So you're right, Claudia, in that Dayraven's mother does have a premonition of the future, which is why she insists on giving him this weird name. And Dayraven does refer to the ghost raven that Dayraven encounters in the first book that leads him into the forest. It refers to the raven that Sean was just alluding to in book 2, where he's climbing the Wyrmberg and he's on his way and he's dangling, on the cliff. And it's the raven, again, that comes along and basically gives him that little push to get him there to the top. And then at the end of the third book, where Dayraven is knowingly making his sacrifice, what we find out is that raven in books 1 and 2 was himself. That he actually sent that back in time because he's in the realm of origins at this moment. And you can do that when you're in the realm of origins. You're outside of time. He sent that knowing that it was going to essentially bring about his own sacrifice, and understanding fully in that moment, I have to get myself on this path. I have to keep myself on this path. And here I am at the end. So he is the raven. He is the day raven. The ghost raven is the day raven. And somehow his mother, Eldilith, in her dying moments, had a premonition that indeed this would be her son's destiny, that he would, in some way, shape, or form, be the day raven. So yeah, I hope that answers that.
Not quite. I was saying that
Okay.
we never saw his mother's thinking. There was no elaboration. No, we can guess that his mother thought that, but we never see it.
Yes, that's true.
It's alluded to in the first book, but never really explored.
And it's mentioned in the first book as well, briefly, as a kind of a foreshadowing, I guess, that she died giving birth to him and insisted for some odd reason that he had this weird name, and that Dayraven is wondering about it himself. But yeah, I'm gonna cheat and just use the authorial authority and say yes, she knew. so, so what's your question for a return?
I'm going to politely request that you allow several rounds of questions for the third book. Not necessarily
Okay.
consecutive, but I have a few good ones and I want to get all of them.
Okay.
So the first one refers actually to the same scene. I was wondering while reading, why did the elf insist in keeping the elf dwellers? He didn't need to. He could have just taken Joruman. And then by the
Okay.
end of the book, I figured it out. You know, existing in the realm of origins, he knew from the beginning of time, outside time, to the end of time, however you want to put it, he knew that eventually he would have this encounter with Dayraven. And
Sure.
he knew that he had to push Dayraven to the position where he would have to commit this ultimate sacrifice. Had he given up his army, he wouldn't have been able to bring Dayraven to the moment when he does what he has to do. So, in a way, the world gets saved. So,
Yeah.
that was, a alpha and omega sort of moment, of Ouroboros kind of moment, everything in one loop.
Yeah, I will add to that, and I love the way you put it. I will add one little thing which you don't see in the trilogy, but you might see a bit in the sequel. Dayraven's act is going to have all kinds of reverberations. What he did down in Cargillion, he has changed the way of Edan. He has changed this religion. It is not going to be the same after he is the prophet. He doesn't really ever intend to be the prophet of Edan. He didn't know that was going to be his role, but he has become the prophet of Edan, and he has changed the way a prophet can do, the way people understand their religion. And so it is, the repercussions will be greater as well. So yeah, just to add to what you were saying, so yeah, beautiful. Yeah. Was there a question stemming from that, or do you want to let me move on to the next one?
Move on, but then please return.
Okay, I will return for sure. Yes. Quinn, what would you like to say or observe on return, on the trilogy as a whole?
Well, I think I messaged you right after I finished it, because I was convinced Dayraven was going to die, and then you tricked me.
Oops.
When we thought he died, and then he didn't, and then he did die. And so I had a little bit of hope there at the end that he wasn't going to die, that you smashed. So
Sorry.
that was really well done. Though I liked it, but I had a couple of questions. The first one is maybe very quick, but I was just wondering if, since you spent so long writing this trilogy, if anything changed about how it ended from when you first started it to now.
Yeah. Oh, that's such a great question. A lot of things changed, a lot of little things. I had a wonderful agent, literary agent that I worked with, and he helped me a lot. Some things changed when I worked with A.P. Canavan, my developmental editor. He really helped me to improve the story a lot. So there were a lot of changes. I did actually, to go back to the first thing you said, I went back and forth about Dayraven's end. I really did. It was an agonizing decision. Does Dayraven survive this story or not? And I had this conversation with my agent, who wonderful person. Ultimately, obviously, I self-published, so it didn't work out, but he helped me a lot. Great guy. He actually is the agent for Christopher Paolini. So he's got fantasy cred for sure. But anyway, we had this, I'll never forget the conversation, because I was talking to him about, what do I do with Day Raven here at the end? Because I have this outcome in mind, and I have this outcome in mind. And he didn't tell me what to do, but he did say to me, in order for even a happy ending to feel compelling, there has to be some loss for the to make it feel real, to have a greater impact. Yeah, you can have a happy ending for everybody, and it will be a more forgettable ending, probably. So I really took that to heart, and as painful and awful and hard as it was, I feel that the ending happened the way it, the most compelling I could make it. So yeah, that's an example of where I really struggled. And I'm glad I did it the way I did most of the time. But it was not an easy thing to do. But then again, a lot of things that are hard to do end up being the right thing to do. So yeah. Yeah.
Cool.
So Claudia has more questions, and if anybody else does as well, feel free to jump in. And you know, whoever likes to. But Claudia, I'll go back to you now for your next one, and you guys just, you know, jump in whenever you want if something occurs to you.
All right.
Thank you. So, my husband, who's a Hindu, he was pointing out to me at some point when I was talking about the book that there's this text in Sanskrit in the Rig Veda, a prayer, that says that before creation there was nothing, in the sense that God appeared, God was made after creation.
Uh-huh.
And I was wondering how that fits in with your universe, because I have the distinct feeling that the energy that is the elf sort of comes after the creation of the world. There's this tree and there's this, you know, universe, and the energy is born from it rather than it creating the universe.
Yeah.
Or maybe I got it wrong.
No, I think that's interesting. So we have two traditions that are in disagreement on this matter, right? So you have the Judeo-Christian Western perspective that basically says God existed first and then creation. Whereas you have the more Eastern, the Hindu and Buddhist conception, I think that that there's everything. There's a primal energy, if you will, that existed first, and out of that came the gods, plural, and that sort of thing. That's more Hinduism, really. But anyway, I'm exploring a lot of the I feel discrepancies, because I do believe that religions are tapping into some very important common things, but that we come up with different answers sometimes. And this is a good example where these different traditions have a different answer to this question about where everything comes from, and that's a very natural thing to wonder about. I don't think we really know a whole lot. You know, I think whether you're, you know, taking a scientific approach or a religious approach, I think a good dose of humility is a good thing. Certainty always scares me a little bit, and I think there's so much mystery in the universe still. So this trilogy is, in a way, is my attempt to wrestle with: can I reconcile certain things about, you know, the answer to our mortality is different in, say, Christianity, which says, you know, live a good life, believe the right things, put your faith in God, and you'll go to this afterlife where things are good. Whereas Buddhism says something more like, well, the key here is to realize that you are ephemeral, and that your individuality is a bit of a delusion, and that you're part of everything, and that's actually kind of beautiful, right? And you are connected to everything. I love that metaphor that I keep talking about here, that I read about in a book by Thich Nhat Hanh, which says that we're all like little waves on the ocean. And each wave thinks of itself as a separate little entity, but really the waves are just part of the water, you know, and will as has always been part of the water and will return to the water. And that's the how do you reconcile those two things, right? That conception of our place in the universe and what we are and where we come from and where everything comes from. So I'm wrestling with that a lot. You know, I'm fascinated by these different approaches because I think we do, you know, maybe the most human thing of all, aside from telling stories, is to wonder about what happens to us when we die, you know, mortality, struggling with mortality. So yeah, I feel like I hope that I don't, you know, in this trilogy necessarily declare an answer to these questions. I don't think that's what I'm doing. I think I'm more trying to give people a forum to think about these things. So I certainly was while I was writing them. So yeah.
I was thinking about it from both the spiritual and scientific point of view, thinking of, you know, Big Bang and the creation of the universe.
Yeah.
You have that first explosion, then you have formation of planets and the stars, and the stars are made of energy, but in order for the stars to exist, first you need matter. You know,
Yeah.
the matter that propulses everything forward. So definitely
Yeah.
creation first, then the energy, whether the energy is self-conscious, self-aware or not, whether we go back or don't go back, these are things that we can explore. But certainly it seems like energy came second after the creation of what we think of world, universe, whatever.
Yeah. Yeah.
So,
It does seem that the universe is groping toward consciousness, right? But yeah.
and it made me remember a book I read as a teenager about astrology, and it made a fairly decent point into how astrology can to a point be believable, in the
Uh-huh.
sense that they were saying, you know, there's a supernova, there are planets, we are made from the same stuff that the stars are made, and
Yeah.
energy is linked, it's related. You made, no, they were explaining the way a voodoo doll would work, in the sense that you take a small part from the energy of the person you want to affect, and that energy is contained in most intimate stuff, whether it's blood, whether it's nail, whatever, you know, something that holds the energy of the person you are trying to affect. And the idea that all energy is connected. If you affect a small part of it, you affect the whole. And the same way, the same concept that applies to witchcraft would also apply to astrology, in the sense that we are made from the same stuff that the celestial bodies are made,
Yeah.
and the way they move influences the way we move. Now, it's clearly not a science, but the concept, I found the concept very interesting, in the sense that we are a little bit of energy from their energy, and we are linked whether we like it or not, whether we see the patterns or we don't see the patterns, but
Right.
there's a connection there.
Yep.
So I
Yep.
was thinking of that also in the way that things happen in your universe.
Yeah. Yeah. I think it's a very apt way to put it. Yeah. So yeah, I do feel that it's important for us as a species to, I mean, if you look at the evolution of humanity, we've come from a place where we're very tribal, and we have this small in-group, and our in-group has been getting bigger and bigger through, not, you know, it's not just a neat progression, but for the most part, we have had a history of enlarging our in-group, where we had a, you know, a tribe which became a clan or whatever, or a clan to tribe to kingdom to nation, whatever, or even there have been big empires. So our sense of our in-group has been expanding. I think, and I've said this a few times before, but I really firmly believe that our survival as a species will depend on our ability to transcend all these in-groups and to understand our connection to all people and to all creatures that we share this world with. I firmly believe that.
As do I. As do I.
Yeah. So I that's something I'm looking at in this story. You know, you have Dayraven kicked out of his little corner of the world and realizing it's just a little corner after all, and that these people that he thought of as so foreign and different from him before are actually very much connected to him. And he transcends that old identity, even as he still loves the place that he came from enough that he would sacrifice himself for it. Yeah. So yeah, that's what I'm trying to do there.
So I had a question.
Sure, Sean.
Duke Silverhand.
Yes, Imhar. Yes.
Yeah. Was it a conscious decision to sideline him? And if so, is that because he's going to play a larger role in the future?
Yeah, he's still around. I feel like in the most direct way, yes, I did sideline Imhar. He's still in the second book and in the third book.
Yep.
He's not
he's
central.
playing a pivotal role on the island.
Yes,
but
he does play a very important role there, and I like his arc as a whole. I feel satisfied with what I did with him because he matures a lot himself.
yes, he does.
He goes from being a very on the surface jolly kind of, but deep down very hurt person, and by the end he's much more serious and also very committed to Rona. And I like that relationship and how it panned out. But
and
even
Saren, like
and
when Saren was a great addition to book 3, by the way.
Oh, thank you. Yeah.
Her going through like the sewers to get to Day, like that was a great scene. And then them reconnecting, I was just like, oh, it's not his sister, but it's his niece, and that's almost even, it might even be better.
Well, that's exactly, you just hit the nail on the head, Sean, because I think my answer to the question of why does Imhar get sidelined is because Saren, basically the weight of his part of the story is put on her, and especially obviously in the third book. And she is directly connected to that bond between Dayraven and Imhar. So in a way, through her, Imhar is still present in the story. Also, I felt that his there were certain characters that I really did want to focus on, Dayraven being one and Sequara being the other, because I see them both as having an important hero's journey, so to speak. I love Imhar, and I wish I could have done more with him, but I feel like I had him in the story enough to where he's serving the story. If I had tried to put him more in there, it would have been more about him than about the story as a whole.
Okay. So
for the integrity of the story, and because of the role that Saren ends up taking, and she really just kind of grabbed hold of me and said, I'm important here. You better focus on me, buddy. Yeah, I think that's my answer to that one. That's a good question.
I felt like the friendship between Day and Imhar was really, really well done.
Yeah.
And then they got split up for reasons, and then we get Orvindil and Norn.
Yeah,
like that friendship is like one of the highlights of this trilogy for me. I really liked the dynamic between those two.
Yeah, that was a semi-conscious tip of the hat to Tolkien with Legolas and Gimli, obviously. Yeah. And also, what was I going to say? It was in reaction to another thing you just said about Imhar, but it's left my mind for the moment. But I'll come back to it maybe. Yeah, no, I'm happy with how his part came out. I think he played his role well, and I think his arc is what it had to be.
It had a satisfying conclusion.
Yeah, that I hope came across really well, and that long wish of his to reunite with his family, it doesn't come true in the way he had hoped, but it comes true through Saren. So yeah, and obviously that's something that she needs as well, very much in her life. So yeah. So
I have one more question.
All right, Quinn.
So I just want to say for all three books, the prologue
Ah,
is probably some among the best prologues I've ever read. Because a lot of times, I'm not a writer or anything, but a lot of times I feel like the prologue as either really just another chapter one. It could have just been a chapter one. It could have been any different. Or it's so far removed from the story that I don't know why it's there, or yeah, I don't understand. So I was just wondering if you could, explain a little bit of maybe why you chose what you chose to write for the prologues that made it feel so impactful and drive me so deep in the story without being like confusing.
oh, cool. Yeah, that's another very perceptive question. And I strongly feel, and it puzzles me that there are people out there who, for some reason, decide that they don't like prologues. It just
Who
seems
doesn't
like,
like
yeah,
Same.
I don't get that. Like that's like, to me, that's like deciding I don't like characters, or I don't like settings, or I don't like prose, or, it just seems like, what? You don't like prologues? Okay. I don't like chapters. Okay. You know,
I don't like epigraphs.
yeah, yeah. So, I mean, look, it's a tool. It can be used well and it can be used not well, just like any other tool. To me, a prologue is an opportunity to tell your reader, here's what to expect. It's an opportunity to tell your reader, here are the themes that I'm going to be wrestling with in this book. It's an opportunity to tell your reader, here's the tone of this book. Here's, and I've hoped that I tried to do all three of those things in the prologues. So with the first prologue in The Way of Edan, I'm saying, look, there's going to be religion in this story. You have these three priests who martyr themselves, and they do so believing that what they're doing is not just the right thing, but the most loving thing they could possibly do. And then, of course, in the second, I'm trying to say, look, this book is going to have a lot of action. It's going to have dragons, and it's going to have, some hopefully exciting moments. Book 3, I started with Dayraven, not knowing who the heck he is, wandering into that inn, and the effect that he has on the people in that inn. That's so central to what happens in that book. The idea of exploring the elf and that struggle going on between Dayraven and the elf, where the elf says, hey, there's a whole lot of suffering here. The easiest way to get rid of the suffering is to take away the people who are causing it. That's humans, right? But Dayraven keeps fighting and saying, no, there is enough beauty and wonder and compassion in humanity to make their lives worth it, despite all the suffering and the pain. So that is the struggle. That is Dayraven's, the essence of his heroism, I think, is his unyielding stance that human lives are worth it, despite all that we do. So yeah, I'm trying to set all that up in each of the prologues, and I'm so glad that they worked for you. Yeah.
Is there a reason that you decided to not do an epilogue?
On the final,
yeah, on Return.
I just felt like the story was done.
Okay.
Yeah, I just felt like that's it. And
was that before you knew you were going to be continuing the story?
I can't remember. I will say that I don't think it's a spoiler. Obviously, Saren's going to be around in 15 years, right? There are certain characters you will.
Dayraven's daughter.
Well, gee, yeah.
I'm surprised nobody has brought that up yet.
Yes. I mean, she's kind of central to.
I would think so.
The sequel, yeah. So yeah, I'm actually excited for people to see what comes of all that. But yes, Dayraven's daughter is going to be a very important character in While Darkness Gathers. So yeah. So Claudia, I don't think you're done, are you? So yeah.
No, I'm not.
Okay. All right. I'll try to be quick.
This one actually refers to what you were talking before about the the elves need to end human pain, but I think it was always going to end the same. I mean, he keeps saying, look at all the suffering, look at all the suffering. And we think that he's referring to, the pain of war, the pain of losing loved ones, the pain of living. But I have a feeling that he's talking about something more profound, and he's talking about the pain of separating the energy from the whole. You take this little bit of from the whole and you give it life as a human being, and it doesn't know that it has been separated. So even if you could have a human being who's eternally happy, never experience any sort of pain, have the perfect flawless life, from the point of view of the elf, that creature is still in pain and not knowing it is in pain,
Yeah.
because it has been separated from its whole, which makes me think that the elf itself must be hurting from all of these little pieces of him being ripped off and given birth, and always waiting for something to return, always to have it snatched back again. So it gives me this feeling, since we have the concept of nirvana and the purpose of reincarnation being that you evolve to the point where living is no longer necessary and you can return eternally to the source.
Yeah.
So I think that the elf yearns for everybody to return to the source. So from this point of view, for him, just existing is a problem, which is a loophole that Dayraven exploits right at the end in the final negotiation with the elf.
Yeah.
Well, he says that we could not experience the joy of being whole unless we experience this here.
Yeah.
Our lives are as necessary as our deaths. You see that our deaths are necessary. Well, I'm telling you that our lives are necessary as well. That without the constant cycle, you don't exist, we don't exist. So you have to relent. I will make the sacrifice to convince you, but you have to relent. You have to accept that the need for the pain of separation in as in incarnation, as in human life, is necessary as much for you as it is for us.
Yeah,
And
that's
that hints at the elf being in pain.
yes. I'm not going to comment a ton on what you just said, except to say that I find that very compelling and beautiful and affirmative. And the idea that death can be beautiful is maybe not immediately intuitive, because we are very attached to our individual egos, ourselves, right? But I do have moments when I feel that the idea that we are part of everything, and that everything is in us, is a beautiful thing. It is wonderful. And having this, I refer to life in places, even as early as the first book, when the elf first, when Dayraven first encounters the elf, as life is like a game, that is eternity hiding from itself. And there is a joy in that recognition when the individual sees themselves in eternity. There is a bliss in that recognition. There is a transcendence. And in order for that to happen, we have to have these individual forms that with some attachment to them. But then to have that revelation, have that epiphany that we are part of everything, that we are everything, right? And that we always have been. So from the elf's perspective, it's almost as if not only do we need to return to that primal source, whatever we want to call it, Edan, God, whatever word you want to have for it. There is the idea of returning to it, but there's also the idea that we never actually even left it, that this whole thing that we're going through, this dance, this beautiful, wonderful, painful dance, is all a game. It's a delusion, and that we are always part of that, even when we think we're not. Yeah. So, but there is beauty in that revelation, I think. So, yeah. Well, gosh, any other questions? We're getting kind of philosophical here at the end, which may be appropriate. But any other questions or observations? This has been really lovely.
I think I'm all set.
Okay.
I'm good.
You're good? Okay. Claudia, how about you?
One more. It
Okay.
sort of relates into the last one. It pertains to what the elf actually is, because at the end we get to find out that the elf is actually not the creation, the energy of creation, not God, not Edan, but actually a window between our lives as individual sparks of Edan and Edan as a whole source. So I think that invites the idea of God or Edan or energy of creation, however you want to put it, as personified, as given individuality. In a way, let's call it Edan. Edan exists outside individuality, while we are little pieces of um how do you call, what's the word, um say, carved little pieces of the same source.
Yeah.
While the elf is an entity that is bridging the gap between being an individual and not being an individual. It gives the opportunity to this massive source to experience being a human without actually stop being what it is. I wonder if just experiencing this connection to Dayraven may have caused some sort of not just pain to the elf, but a little bit of shaping itself into an individual.
Yeah, that is why elves are both beautiful and terrifying, right? So yeah, I think the elf is, in a sense, changed a bit through its symbiosis with Dayraven. And that also, when it transfers to Yoramon, it gets a little bit from him. And when it transfers to the Ilarchai, it gets something from them as well. I would say that is the case, which is why it acts the way it does subsequent to that encounter. And that's why the mark is in danger, because it picks up something from the Ilarchai, this urge to, to battle and win glory and all of that. So it does. I can't explain fully. I want to leave a little mystery there. But I think that the interactions between the elf as you say, a window, or even maybe of a reflection, but as a window between us and Edan, that is its pivotal role here. And the other big mystery, which I can't explain, is why Dayraven survives his initial encounter with the elf. He's the only person to have done so. Meeting an elf is just certain death until Dayraven, right? So that's another mystery that will go unanswered.
Perhaps this was always meant to be, which makes me think of destiny in the way that Dayraven meets Seren, which is unlikely but happens. So somehow foretold, or pre-laid for him to walk this path. Same happened with his surviving of the elf. Maybe an intention on the elf's part to experience humanity for a while. And since the elf has been changed by his experience with Dayraven, by his interaction with Joruman, with the Ilarchai, since it exists outside of time, it makes you wonder if it knew these changes, if these changes were already in it before his encounter with Dayraven.
That would make
like
sense.
I said, like an Ouroboros, and everything goes in the loop.
Yeah.
It didn't experience it until meeting Dayraven. It didn't understand temporal life until meeting Dayraven, but then it exists outside of time. Therefore, it always knew, it always had this experience before Dayraven was even born.
Yeah, that's a great point, because as much as we can't comprehend the perspective of the elf outside of time, it also doesn't know our perspective, stuck within time. So yeah. Fascinating. Well, I've taken so much of your time, speaking of time, and I really appreciate all three of you so much. I'm very grateful that you have read the story that I labored on for so long, and it makes me more happy than I can express that that parts of it spoke to you, to all three of you. It just means the world to me. So thank you so much, all three of you.
Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you.
And I am very excited for the While Darkness Gathers.
Yes.
That is very high on my list of books I'm excited about for next year.
Oh, so cool. Yeah, I'm hoping for August of 2024. Yeah. So. All right. Well, thank you, everybody. These three are fantastic. I will have a link to Claudia's channel for those of you who want to see some awesome interviews with Steven Erickson. And Quinn does his reviews for Silverstones. I have talked about Silverstones before. Sean is just an awesome dude who is so much fun and may have a great channel in the future as well. So three lovely people. And thank you everybody for watching, and until next time.